Welcome, dear brave soul. You're tuning into Horror Podcast, and I'm truly grateful you're here. Whether you're a long-time listener or just stumbled upon this channel, thank you for joining me for another scary tale. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and means more than you know. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, what brought you here, or even what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Your support keeps this channel going, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Now, let's get into today's horror story. I never thought of myself as someone who's scared easily. I grew up in Leicester, in a neighborhood where Friday nights meant shouting in the street, broken bottles on the curb, and the occasional fight outside the corner shop. By the time I turned 20, moving abroad for a year felt less like a risk and more like an escape. I wanted to prove to myself that I could handle something bigger, something quieter, something that didn't feel like I was always holding my breath. My name's Natalia, though everyone calls me Tally. I came to the US as part of my language program, settling in Portland, Oregon for the year. It wasn't my first choice. I wanted New York like every other student on my course, but by the time I got the placement, all the spots were taken. Portland was quieter, smaller, greener. I told myself that was fine. It might even be better. I wasn't much of a party girl like my older sister back home anyway. I liked bookstores, coffee shops, and evenings that ended by 11. For the first few months, things were uneventful in the best way. I spent afternoons walking along the Willamette River, taking photos of old bridges, and trying to blend into the rhythm of the city. I made a few friends, mostly classmates from my program, and some locals who tolerated my clumsy attempts at American slang. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. 2 weeks ago, though, a group of us decided to take a trip south to celebrate my boyfriend James's birthday. He'd flown out from the UK to visit me, and I didn't want him to spend the entire week just wandering around Portland coffee shops while I translated French text for class. My friend Mason grew up in a small town called Silverton, about an hour and a half away, and he suggested we rent a place near there and drive out to the wine country. His girlfriend, Emily, tagged along too. We booked an Airbnb on the edge of town, a little one-story house with a porch swing and flower beds that looked half wild. The listing described it as a cozy, private retreat perfect for couples. The host's name was Robert. Reviews said the house was quiet, tidy, close enough to walk into town, but tucked away from the noise. The only thing out of our budget was the fancy bed and breakfast near the vineyard, so the Airbnb felt like the next best thing. Dinner at the vineyard was beautiful, even for someone like me who didn't know much about wine. We ate steak and pasta under string lights, and the owner himself came out to offer us a glass of something special for James's 23rd. We clinked glasses, laughed until our faces hurt, and ended the night strolling through the empty streets of Silverton, stopping every few feet to point at murals or old buildings. Mason and Emily teased us about being the couple who makes the rest of us look bad, and I didn't even care. By the time we made it back to the Airbnb, it was nearly 1 a.m. We sat outside on the porch with another bottle of wine, sharing stories, smoking cheap cigarettes we bought from a vending machine in town, and letting the night stretch longer than it should have. Eventually we called it. Mason and Emily took the guest room, while James and I went to the main bedroom. I remember falling into bed with that pleasant haze of wine and fatigue, the kind where your body gives out before your mind can catch up. It must have been around 3 when I woke. At first I thought it was just a dream pulling me halfway to the surface, but then I heard it again, scratching. A soft, irregular sound near the front of the house. It could have been at the door, or maybe at the window. I couldn't tell. My first thought was a stray dog, or maybe a raccoon. The house sat at the end of a quiet street, and the host had warned us about animals. I lay there, staring into the dark, waiting for the sound to come again. But it stopped, just as quickly as it had started. It was gone. The silence that followed was almost heavier, like the night had swallowed the noise before I could decide what it was. My eyelids grew heavy again, and I sank back into the pillow, telling myself it was nothing. The next sound that woke me wasn't from outside. It was James getting up to use the bathroom. I watched his shadow pass across the room, the faint moonlight slipping through the blinds, catching the side of his face. I closed my eyes, waiting to drift again, but a strange feeling rooted me to the mattress. A pressure, low and cold, like someone had stepped into the room. It's hard to explain how you know when you're being watched, but you do. It's a pull, a weight that makes your chest tighten. I forced my eyes open and scanned the room. For a second, I thought I was just imagining it, until my gaze landed on the window. The blinds weren't fully shut. James had left them cracked earlier when we'd opened the window to let the air in. And in that pale strip of moonlight, I saw it. A hand. Pale, thin, fingers curled around the edge of the frame, pulling it open inch by inch. My body locked up. I couldn't breathe, couldn't shout, couldn't even move. Then I heard it. A sound I hadn't heard in years. A camera shutter. That sharp, mechanical click that belonged to old film cameras. My grandfather used to take family photos with one, and the sound was so specific it carved straight into my memory. I heard it once, then again, slow, deliberate, like whoever was out there wanted me to know. I don't know how long I lay there, frozen. It felt like hours, though it must have only been seconds. Finally, I forced my throat to work and shouted, "James!" The hand disappeared instantly. The blinds rattled closed, and I heard the sound of feet hitting the ground outside. James came rushing back into the room, eyes wide, asking what happened. I pointed at the window, my voice shaking too much to explain. He yanked it open and looked out. At first, the street was empty. The porch light cast a pale glow across the gravel drive, the flower beds, the fence line. Nothing moved. Then, faint but distinct, came the sound of footsteps. Someone running, fast, growing fainter as they disappeared down the road. We didn't sleep again. Neither of us dared to. We sat upright in bed, the lamp on, waiting for the sky to shift from black to gray. At first light, we woke Mason and Emily, whispering what had happened. They stared at us with a mix of disbelief and fear, then quickly got dressed. Mason volunteered to get the car while Emily and I packed our things. James and I returned the key to the lockbox on the porch. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped it. I messaged Robert, the host, explaining everything. He replied a few hours later, short and clipped. "Sorry you were disturbed. It's a safe neighborhood. Probably nothing to worry about." He didn't say much else. No apology beyond that. No offer of a refund. No sense of urgency. James was convinced it was the host himself, that the way Robert brushed it off was too suspicious. Mason disagreed, saying it was just how people were in small towns, less dramatic, less concerned with strangers. Emily stayed quiet, eyes fixed on the road ahead as we drove away. That was almost 2 weeks ago now, and I still can't shake the image. That hand, pale in the moonlight, curling around the window frame. That old camera shutter clicking, over and over. The thought that someone has photos of me lying there in bed, vulnerable, unaware, exposed, makes my stomach twist in ways I can't even put into words. I don't know who it was. I don't know what they wanted. And I don't know if those photos will ever show up somewhere online, waiting for me to find them. What I do know is this: I'll never feel the same about staying in a stranger's house again. Some moments don't fade, no matter how much you want them to. Some moments stay with you like a stain, faint but permanent, reminding you of the night you realized safety was never guaranteed. I never put much stock in signs or omens, but that winter in Maine changed how I look at certain moments. It was late January of 2020, a gray stretch of days when work had all but consumed both me and my wife, Claire. She was pulling 60-hour weeks at the clinic, worn thin from back-to-back pediatric shifts. I was buried under deadlines at the small branding agency where I worked, staying up until 2 or 3 most nights chasing edits for clients I barely believed in anymore. We just passed our 9th wedding anniversary, and instead of celebrating, we'd spent the night slumped on opposite ends of the couch, scrolling on our phones. That realization stung more than I admitted at the time. My name's Ryan, and I'll never forget the night I suggested we get away. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not even really planned. I just remember looking at her over the rim of my coffee cup one morning and saying, "We need to disappear for a while. Just us. Somewhere quiet." She didn't argue. She just looked at me with tired eyes and nodded. That was how desperate we were to step out of our lives for even a weekend. We spent that night browsing listings until we found it. A steep black A-frame cabin sitting at the edge of a frozen lake in a small town called Brennan Hollow, Maine. The pictures looked unreal. Triangular windows stretching floor to ceiling, snow piled neatly against the deck railing, tall pines huddled tight on both sides. The host, a man named Evan, had only a handful of reviews, but they were glowing. People used words like serene, peaceful, restorative. It felt like exactly what we needed. We booked it for 3 nights, Friday through Monday. The second the confirmation hit my inbox, Claire leaned against me and whispered, "This is going to be good for us." I wanted to believe her. The drive north was long, but not unpleasant. The further we went, the narrower the roads became, until the highway gave way to small rural lanes barely wide enough for 2 cars. Snow flurries followed us most of the way. Claire made a playlist of songs we used to play when we first met, early 2000s indie bands and a few old Norah Jones tracks. For a little while, it felt like stepping back in time, like we were shaking off the years of stress with every mile we put behind us. By the time we reached Brennan Hollow, it was early afternoon. The town was tiny, maybe 1,000 people at most. A single main street with a post office, an antique shop, and a general store with faded signage. The directions took us past the last house and down an unpaved road that wound deep into the woods before opening up into a clearing. There it was. The A-frame cabin stood facing the lake, just like the photos. Its black siding contrasted sharply against the snow, windows glinting in the pale sun. Everything around it was hushed, the kind of quiet that almost feels too heavy for your chest. Inside it was warm. A small fire had already been set in the hearth, ready to be lit. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something herbal, maybe sage. On the counter sat a handwritten note tucked beside a jar of cocoa mix. "Welcome, Ryan and Claire. Let the mountains hold you." Claire read it over my shoulder and chuckled nervously. "That's either poetic or a little creepy." "Maybe both," I said. The first night was better than I could have hoped. We cooked pasta, opened a bottle of wine, and played cards at the wooden dining table. The wind howled against the windows, but we felt safe, wrapped in quilts upstairs. Claire looked more at ease than I'd seen her in months. She curled up next to me by the fire and whispered, "I want to remember us like this." I told her I did too. The next morning, I woke to the groaning sound of the lake ice shifting under the weight of the cold. Claire was already outside, bundled in a blanket, sipping coffee from a chipped mug as she stared out at the frozen water. "It's solid," she said when I joined her. I checked. "It's at least 3 inches thick. You planning to walk on it?" I asked. Maybe, just to say I did. The thought unsettled me for reasons I couldn't explain. I laughed it off, but inside I felt something tug low in my chest. We ventured into town that afternoon, bought pastries from a small bakery, and stopped by the general store for more firewood. The woman at the counter, gray-haired with a thick accent, asked where we were staying. When Claire mentioned the cabin by the lake, the woman's expression flickered for just a moment. She smiled politely, but her eyes seemed to harden. "Beautiful property," she said softly. "Keep your firewood dry. Nights get long out there." On the drive back, Claire frowned. "Did you see the way she looked at us?" "Yeah," I admitted, like she wanted to say something else. By the time we returned, snow had started falling hard. We settled in for the evening, lit the fire, and watched a movie on Claire's laptop. Around 9, the lights flickered once, then steadied. I went into the kitchen to grab more wine and noticed one of the cabinets hanging open. I was sure it had been closed earlier. I shut it, told myself I was imagining things, and went back to the living room. We fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in blankets, fire burning low. At 2:17 a.m., a thud woke us both. It came from the loft upstairs. I sat up, heart hammering. Claire's hand gripped my arm. "You heard that?" "Yeah." The sound came again, softer this time. The creak of floorboards underweight. I grabbed the flashlight we'd left near the hearth and crept up the stairs, each step groaning beneath me. The loft looked empty. Nothing out of place. Just the unmade bed and our bags at the foot of it. I scanned slowly, then stopped cold. The closet door was open. Just an inch, but open. I knew I had shut it before we went downstairs. The air felt heavier suddenly, colder. Claire's voice came from below, small and shaky. "Ryan." I lowered the beam of the flashlight, my throat dry. "It's fine," I said, though I didn't believe it. We locked ourselves in the loft the rest of the night, listening to the lake groan under the weight of the cold, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally rose, everything looked the same. Snow on the deck, trees still, the world calm. But something in me had shifted. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt like waiting. We cut the trip short, left that morning, and never looked back. To this day, I don't know what woke us. I don't know why the closet door had been open, or why the woman in town looked at us the way she did when we mentioned the cabin. But I know this. Some places hold more than they show. And sometimes, what feels like peace is just stillness, stretched too thin, waiting for you to notice the cracks underneath. I can still remember the exact moment when we finally admitted we needed to leave the city, even if only for a few days. It was early March, one of those raw New England evenings when the sky turns the color of a bruised lawn before dinner. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at a stack of unread emails that had piled up from a week of missed deadlines. Across from me, Olivia was on her third glass of wine, shoulders slumped, her scrubs still faintly smelling of disinfectant from another double shift at the hospital. We didn't even argue anymore. We were both too exhausted for that. Our conversations had shrunk to logistical fragments. "Did you pay that bill? Are you working late tomorrow? Can you pick up more coffee?" "My name's Mark," I said one night to no one in particular, like I was reminding myself. Because the truth was, I felt like I'd been disappearing in slow motion. That night, Olivia broke the silence first. She put her glass down and said, almost pleading, "Let's get out of here. Just for a week. I don't care where. I just can't do this anymore." I didn't argue. The thought of disappearing somewhere quiet, away from the city's endless hum, felt like the only thing keeping me upright. So we opened her iPad, curled up under a blanket, and scrolled through listings until we found it. A small A-frame cabin tucked against the edge of a lake in northern Vermont. The pictures looked like something from a postcard. Snow-dusted roof, tall pines flanking both sides, and a frozen lake stretching out just beyond the porch. The host, a woman named Sarah, had glowing reviews. Words like peaceful, restorative, cozy kept coming up. Guests wrote about waking up to silence, broken only by the crack of ice shifting on the water. It sounded like the kind of stillness we thought might heal us. We booked it for 5 nights starting Monday. Sarah messaged almost immediately, thanking us and promising to leave the place warm and stocked with firewood. She mentioned a lockbox on the porch and said she'd send the code the morning of check-in. Everything felt easy, reassuring. The next few days blurred by in a haze of packing and tying up loose ends at work. I could see Olivia change as we moved closer to leaving, her shoulders a little looser, her laugh showing up more often. For the first time in months, we let ourselves imagine rest. On the drive north, snow flurries swirled across the windshield. The interstate gave way to winding roads lined with bare trees and scattered farmhouses. When we finally rolled into the town closest to the cabin, a place called Eden Ridge, it felt more like a memory than a functioning town. A post office, a general store with a faded sign, one diner with a handwritten open sign taped to the window. By the time we turned down the narrow private road listed in Sarah's directions, we'd lost cell service completely. The GPS froze just before the car crested a hill. And then there it was. The cabin stood in a clearing at the edge of the lake, just like the photos. The roof sloped steeply, smoke curled from the chimney, and the porch was dusted with a thin layer of snow. The lake behind it glittered under the pale sun, its surface solid and still. It should have been perfect, but as soon as we pulled into the driveway, something felt off. A black SUV sat parked to the side, half buried in snow like it hadn't moved in weeks. There were no tire tracks leading to it, no footprints breaking the blanket of white. The windows of the cabin were dark, the porch light off. Olivia looked at me. "Do we just go in?" I climbed out, the air sharp in my lungs, and stepped onto the porch. The lockbox hung beside the door, but there was no code, no note. I tried calling Sarah, but the call went straight to voicemail. The door itself was unlocked. Inside, the air was frigid, colder than outside, as though no one had lit the fireplace in days. The smell hit us first, stale wood smoke, mixed with something sour, the kind of smell that clings to a room left shut for too long. The interior looked like the photos, but wrong in subtle ways. Books scattered on a table, a mug half full of something cloudy on the counter, a blanket thrown haphazardly on the couch. It looked lived in, but abandoned mid-motion. Maybe she left in a hurry, I said, though the words felt thin even as I said them. That night, we lit a fire and tried to settle in. But as the cabin warmed, a different sound began. It was faint at first, like a soft tapping behind the walls. We both noticed it. "You hear that too, right?" Olivia whispered. I nodded, straining to listen. Tap, pause, tap, different walls each time. We try to laugh it off. Old cabins make noise, which shifts. Animals nest in rafters. But the sound didn't stop. It moved, ceiling, floor, then the wall by the bed. Sometimes it was soft, like fingertips. Other times it was heavier, a dull thud, deliberate. On the second night, Olivia swore she heard someone whisper her name. I told her she was dreaming, but I'd heard something too. Something just low enough to doubt myself. By the third day, we decided to leave. Bags half-packed, nerves raw. But when we stepped outside, the road we'd driven in on wasn't there. Where the packed trail had been, there was only dense forest. No tracks, no sign of passage. Our phones couldn't connect. Even the emergency call screen failed. We lasted 2 more days like that. Barely speaking, barely sleeping, taking turns watching the fire burn low. Olivia carved lines into the wood beam above the fireplace to mark the days. But the sun rose and set at the same exact angle each time, like the world outside refused to move forward. On the 5th night, the tapping grew louder, turning into clear footsteps above us. We hadn't noticed the attic panel before, tucked into the ceiling near the kitchen. Neither of us wanted to, but we had a look. I dragged the table under it, climbed up, and pushed it open. Cold air spilled down. I raised my phone flashlight into the darkness. The space was lined with old Polaroids pinned to the beams. Each showed the same cabin, the same rooms, but with different people in them. Couples, families, singles. Some smiling stiffly, others looking afraid. In the corner sat a mattress, worn thin, and a camera on a tripod pointing straight at the trapdoor. Something shifted in the shadows behind it. I dropped back, nearly slipping from the table, and the panel slammed shut above me. We didn't sleep after that. We stayed by the fire until it went out, too afraid to move. At some point, maybe morning, maybe not, there was a knock at the front door. Just one. Sharp, deliberate. When we opened it, the forest road was back. Our car sat without a speck of snow on it. like it had never sat idle. We left without speaking, without looking back. By the time we reached cell service again, the listing had vanished from the app. We filed a report with the local police, who told us no property was registered at that address, that the land was part of a conservation area. No structures, no utilities, nothing. Olivia doesn't talk about it anymore. When I ask, she shakes her head and changes the subject. But sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I picture that attic, the Polaroids, the mattress, the camera waiting. And I wonder how many times that cabin has been rented out. How many people stood where we did, hearing footsteps that shouldn't exist, realizing too late that the silence outside wasn't peace at all. It was something else, something waiting.